We'll start now. Good morning, everyone. At the outset, let me wish all of you a very World Maritime Day. I would like to thank the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies and Air Marshal Gokhale sir for partnering us on this event. And we have a big announcement, as I have said earlier, to make today, particularly for the young participants. We are announcing a UDA project fellowship, a UDA research fellowship, where students and young professionals will be supported. The project fellowship is a 5-month fellowship, which is basically a semester where students basically do a project, and they will be supported and guided by us. And the second is a research fellowship, which will be towards coming out with a monograph, and there will be some topics which will be discussed with them, and then we will finalize. So I request all the young participants to keep track and of this, and we will be starting this campaign right from tomorrow. And so please keep watch on the MRC website, and please do join us for this. To webinar, who better than Commodore Rajan Veer sir, someone who has been part of the entire post-independence maritime journey in India and globally, with over 3 years of naval career and then 2 decades in the merchant navy. He yet not done post that, and then he started the Indian Maritime Foundation, which is now covered more than 26 years. So his contribution to the maritime domain continues, and who better person than Rajan sir to start and welcome all of us on this webinar. Rajan sir, please.
I wish you all a very happy World Maritime Day. I welcome you on behalf of the Director, Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, Pune, Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, and the Director of the Maritime Research Center, Pune, Dr. Arnav Das, who are hosting the webinar today on envisioning India as a maritime nation. We welcome especially Professor S.P. Majumdar, founder of Symbiosis Society, who will be delivering the keynote address on the role of academia in shaping India's strategic vision. Professor Majumdar sir, you are an icon among the academics, all the academics in India. And we are greatly honored by your distinguished presence with us today. The phenomenal growth of Symbiosis in India under your inspiring leadership is a legend, and we are truly filled with pride. I welcome, a warm welcome to you, sir. Dr. Arnav Das will then speak and set the pace by his presentation on the underwater domain awareness framework in the Indian Ocean region. Our aim today is to reach out to the academia and policymakers to facilitate a maritime culture for making our communities more sea-minded. We're bringing together senior level speakers to deliberate on various dimensions and to evolve a cogent way ahead. A detailed dialogue resolution will be prepared and submitted to the authorities within and outside the government for further action. Eminent speakers will then follow. They are Vice Admiral D.S.P. Verma, a distinguished admiral and former Director General Strategic Submarine Project known as the ATV project. Captain Sudhir Subedar, a senior and very experienced master mariner who is the president of ICC Shipping Association. And Captain Brijesh Kalra, a distinguished vice president, Larsen & Toubro Defense. Gentlemen, we welcome you warmly. Finally, Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale will give the closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we are celebrating World Maritime Day 2020, today, the 24th of September. The celebration is coordinated annually by the International Maritime Organization, which is the United Nations agency and the regulatory body for shipping worldwide and with 167 member states. The theme of the World Maritime Day this year is Sustaining Shipping for a Sustainable Planet. The theme emphasizes the role of shipping globally in the well-being and the sustenance of our people. For example, IMO's framework for sustained shipping, for sustainable shipping, has been adopting measures such as to cut greenhouse gas emissions, to implement ballast water management convention, to protect the polar regions, to reduce marine litter, to implement digitization in shipping, and so on and so forth. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the professionalism and sacrifice of the 2 million seafarers who serve on world's merchant fleet. The ships have continued to transport over 80% of world trade, including the essential medical supplies, food, and other basic goods that are critical for the COVID-19 recovery. But unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of seafarers on this World Maritime Day have been facing acute, unprecedented crises as they are stranded at sea with lockdowns, border closures, and only a limited number of flights operating. They are unable to get off their ships to go home after their contracts have expired. The International Chamber of Shipping and the IMO have been addressing this serious problem of crew change urgently. Stringent protocols have now been laid down by the IMO for the ship owners to follow to ensure smooth and safe crew change and to keep the trade flowing. Many thousands have now been sent home, but many thousands of them are still on board their ships waiting to leave. However, positive momentum has been gained over recent weeks to ensure that 100% crew changes are implemented as soon as possible. Finally, may I please say a word about the Indian Maritime Foundation. It is an NGO, now over 26 years old, run entirely by volunteers. Its goal is to raise awareness of the oceans and to rekindle maritime consciousness and pride in our people in India, since we all belong to a major maritime subcontinental nation. Captain A.C. Dixit is the president of Indian Maritime Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is natural and in the fitness of things, therefore, that the Indian Maritime Foundation and the Maritime Research Center, having similar goals, should be mutually supportive and work closely together to study the underwater domain awareness and its framework that is under focus in the webinar today. We welcome you again, ladies and gentlemen, for participating in the webinar today. Thank you.
I would like to now welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. S.B. Majumdar sir. And Majumdar sir needs introduction. Padma Shri in 2005 and Padma Bhushan in 2012. His contribution to the field of academics is unparalleled. He founded and nurtured the Symbiosis Society to be one of the world-class institutions. And I'm sure many successful people achievements to the institutes run under the Symbiosis Society. Dr. Majumdar sir, we would like to hear from you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Das. Commodore Rajan V, a grand old man of maritime domain, my friend Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, Commandant Arnab Das, distinguished participants, friends and viewers. I'm thankful to you, and especially Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, whom I can never know, for giving me the opportunity to be with you on the occasion of World Maritime Day. In spite of COVID-19, the day is being celebrated all over the world. But on account of pandemic, this day is being celebrated online. This year's theme of World Maritime Day is Sustainable Shipping for Sustainable Planet. International Maritime Organization and shipping industry have done excellent work to create an awareness of sustainable development goals by adopting several measures. Shipping, as you know, accounts for about 80% of world trade, and over 2 million seafarers are involved in this. I learned that it is a matter of concern that because of COVID-19 pandemic, thousands of seafarers are stranded at sea and face humanitarian crisis. All of us have sympathies for those seafarers, and I'm sure government will find ways and means to resolve this issue. Friends, today we have come together to share our thoughts and views on how India can become a strong maritime nation. But before that, I would like to ponder over a thought. What is the definition of maritime? What constitutes maritime nation? And Vice Admiral John Alexander of US once said that we all are maritime nations. We all prosper through trade, and the majority of the trade goes through the sea. And he defines it as dependence on sea and mastery of the sea. When you consider countries of world, you can see at one end of the spectrum, there is Great Britain, which is the ideal maritime nation, and which, as you know, one time ruled over several countries in the world for its maritime manpower. And on the other hand, there is Russia, it's a classic land power. Coastline. Nature ordained India to be a maritime nation. There is evidence that Indian ships dominated the vast ocean around the peninsula from 4000 years BC till 17th century AD. And this was reason enough for the ocean around it to be known as Indian Ocean, the only ocean in the world named after a country. Indian Ocean has recently emerged as world's focus in maritime domain. India has a long coastline, over 300 islands and islets, an executive economic zone of over 2 million square meters, and has 12 major ports. I'm told that 90% of India's trade by volume consists of transits by sea. India has a vibrant shipping industry, a thriving fishing industry, offshore oil and gas interests, deep seabed mining area in the central Indian Ocean. India has vast maritime interests, and one of these include blue economy, which need to be harnessed by efficient utilization of marine resources. Our government has launched a massive project to realize the Sagar vision, and I am told that it was the original idea for Nitin Gadkari. which includes security and growth of all in the region. It is obvious that these massive projects require human resource on a very big scale. And now I come to the most important relevant point of this seminar. As all of us know, India is now a young country. Youth all over the world constitute the engine of growth and development. And fortunately, India is now is passing through a very interesting period, which we call demographic dividend. India's population is 134 crores, and it is a matter of joy that 50% of population, that is 67 crores people, are below the age of 25. And this constitutes a very humongous workforce. I will point out that American population, total American population is about 62 crores, which means our young population of our country is twice the population of the whole USA. UK has a total population of 10 crores, which means that our young population itself is 6 times more than the total UK population. My submission is, if our youth are provided skill development education in maritime area, India can certainly become developed and strong maritime nation. And fortunately, our new National Education Policy 2020, which was drafted under the chairmanship of Dr. Krishnan Rangan, provides many good avenues. For example, the NEP 2020 provides all universities in our country will be multidisciplinary and colleges will be degree granting colleges in future. If our students are provided skills in maritime education, training and research, India will be a strong maritime nation. Personally, I feel that under the leadership of Dr. Das, Maritime Research Center is doing extremely well. We are interested in conducting many projects in maritime. But may I suggest that instead of restricting your activities only to research, why not also include education, training, and research? Because that will go a long way. Somehow, our youth, Dr. Das, are not aware of opportunities in maritime domain. And I'm sure, and you are the best person to tell our youth that perhaps with the encouragement of government, with the dedication of person like you and the blessings of the senior people in maritime domain, I'm sure you will be able to provide many skill development courses in maritime area. And therefore, I urge upon you to consider my request. I hope, I wish you all the best. And before I close, I would like to give recently you might have heard on TV that two girls, Sub-Lieutenant Riti Singh and Sub-Lieutenant Tyagi, were selected. They are the first women. And Sub-Lieutenant Riti Singh is now one of the Navy first women combat aviators to be deployed in warships. I am very proud to say on this very auspicious of World Maritime Day that she happens to be the alumna of Symbiosis Institute of Technology. She was with Symbiosis from 2013 to 2017 and passed Bachelor of Technology from Symbiosis in Computer Science. This shows that given an opportunity, Indian talent can rise to any heights. And I'm sure that on this auspicious day, let us all resolve that instead of confining our activities only to research in maritime domain. I urge upon Dr. Das, and I'm sure with the blessings of young person, Bhushan Gokhale, Commodore uh, Rajan Veer, and others who are participating in this seminar, we will be able to establish good maritime education, training, and research institute in Pune. And if there is something that Symbiosis International University can do for this institute, we will be extremely happy. With this note, I wish you all a happy World Maritime Day and wish you all the best. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. I think it was extremely encouraging for all of us to hear you and the kind words that you've given to all of us. Many of the things that you've said, I think, sir, we are thinking about it, and we will definitely come back to you, discuss, and we will take it forward on a national level, sir. Now, I think it is my turn to give a broad perspective, the underwater domain awareness and the various opportunities. I think some of it I will be able to cover what Majumdar sir has said. And as I had initially said, that there are many successful people will owe their success to sir, and that is what it is. Sir could be an example today. Thank you so much, sir. I would be trying to cover underwater domain awareness framework that we have been working on. This is a unique concept that we have developed at MRC, and definitely it is something which is now gaining momentum, and we are very see a lot of encouragement coming from very senior people. I'll try and cover under some of these aspects. So what is the acoustics in the underwater domain? Let me quickly give you what it is. There are many blue economic applications where sound is a very, very important component. Fishing in India, still, I think we have a very high percentage of unorganized fishing, but I think slowly, if we have to become a $5 trillion economy, we have to get into more technology, and there are many opportunities there. Oil and gas industry, it is well known, uses a lot of underwater sound, and there's a lot to do there. Indigenous technology has a tremendous scope. Navy, I mean, establishment, I don't want to discuss this slide in detail, but you can understand from what all you can see. There are many systems that are deployed by navies across the world, and Indian Navy is definitely one of the top navies in the world. So there's a lot of technology requirement, but one important aspect that I would like to highlight here is that the Indian Ocean region, because of the tropical littoral conditions, need indigenous effort, and that's where MRC is also focusing to some extent. But it also brings a lot of opportunity for the young India to contribute to this domain. Global warming is a big concern, and global warming monitoring also is done using acoustics. There's an ATOC system, acoustic thermometry of the ocean, being led by the West. But similar systems are required here so that we can monitor global warming and bring a very calibrated response to that. Marine mammals, I mean, that was the human dominated or the anthropogenic use of sound. But marine mammals also use sound for various biologically critical functions. You can see echolocation being done by them for foraging, that is finding food, for navigation, for communication, and various biologically critical functions, which is important for their well-being. They use very sophisticated sound. This is a humpback whale sound. You can see the very clear, like what we have in musical notes. So there's a lot of research opportunities there. I will not go into too much detail. Having said that, the clash of human use of sound in the underwater domain and the marine mammals is causing concerns on the sustainability part of it. So when we talk about, we have to also keep track of the sustainability concerns. So there is many things that we need to look at. I will not go into details now. We have limited time. But at the same time, it is important when I say sustainability, it is not about that we want to ban certain activities. We will have to navigate development through a sustainable model. So with a higher understanding, and that's what we call underwater domain awareness, we can actually navigate, bring regulations which are not to hamper development, but which is to allow navigating development through these challenges that we face. Now we are seeing a whole lot of such strandings all across the world, and these strandings are primarily because of shipping. And shipping is a very, very important component. I mean, these are some of the scenes that you see now, which is a very, very scary and very, very sad kind of a scene. It's not just abroad, but are three pictures that have happened in our coast. I mean, the first one is a 40 feet blue whale off the south of Mumbai, then a 50 feet bride whale of the coast of Karwar, and then 90 pilotless whales off the coast of Tuticorin. I have investigated the first two, and this is because of the anti-piracy operations being led by various countries together in the Somali coast and the western coast of India. We'll not go into the details. There's a detailed paper if somebody is interested, we'll like to look at. But what I'm trying to highlight is that this problem is not far away from us. It is very close to us now, and we need to give a serious look at this aspect. Now, trying to look at, I mean, these strandings are because of the shipping. Shipping is something which is very difficult to regulate because it has got a direct link with the economic, the global GDP, and so the and this graph that you can see connects the environmental degradation very, very directly to the shipping traffic. So we need to bring in technology. We need to bring in various measures where we can, because shipping cannot be banned or cannot be reduced. It has to go on. But definitely, I think we need to bring a more sustainable framework for shipping globally and particularly in India. Now, European Union and various organizations globally are looking at regulating shipping noise. But in India, I think there is much more work needs to be done. DG Shipping has definitely recognized some of the work that we are doing, but I think a lot more work still needs to be done. This is one of the work we have done. I'm highlighting this to tell the young generation that these are many opportunities that are available. This is the underwater noise in the Indian Ocean region because of shipping. So we have built this high technology map based on AI and ML based techniques, where the entire shipping traffic data from the automated identification system has been converted to the underwater noise. So this can be used by various stakeholders. One is that the conservation people know how this is, and this is a real-time map. At every minute, this can be updated, and based on the inputs that we have, this is customized to the Indian condition in the Indian Ocean region, the underwater condition. So such maps are available, have been designed by us. This got us a won us a Maritime Innovation Award, Global Maritime Innovation Award. Last December, we were in France for this, and European Union is also very, very serious on this aspect. We are in touch with some people, but this has other applications. Like Navy can also use this. So we have developed certain products based on this particular thing that we have done, how underwater sonars can be developed, how sonars can be designed, submarines can be deployed, and various such things. And now we have some senior partners globally who are looking to collaborate with us on this aspect. Now, survey, I mean, now coming to a very specific, I want to be very specific today. What are the opportunities? I mean, one can see India's position in the Indian Ocean region. Acoustic survey is a particular domain that needs a very, very serious look. And probably I'm trying to answer some of the aspects raised by Majumdar sir also. Acoustic survey is required for sediment classification, that is for port management, oil and gas industry, inland water transport, water resource management, underwater search and rescue, hydrographic surveys, marine environmental monitoring. This one skill can create so many different opportunities. Getting more specific, I'm talking about industry connect, like oil and gas and the associated industries, underwater surveys for mining and mapping, government regulators in the maritime sector, NGOs involved in marine in environmental monitoring, consultants for environmental impact. Any new project has a separate budget for environmental impact assessment. This is a huge opportunity for young people to even look at startup ideas in this. Irrigation departments and flood control across states need something like this. Maritime security agencies require acoustic surveys. Port authorities and shipping industry require this. I mean, to even for safe navigable waters, we need to have this kind of thing. So scientific organizations and policymakers need to look at this very, very seriously. Now, come down more specific to a job description. I've just named a few. I'm only talking about acoustic survey today, but when we look at the broad underwater domain awareness, there's many such aspects that can be discussed and look at it. The first three are skill development, which is probably below the graduate level. I mean, technicians will be required to maintain, repair, and operate. The augers are required. Deployment specialists will be required. And you can imagine the volume I'm talking about. We have a huge country. I'm not even looking outside, but Indian Ocean region is something huge. We are looking at 42 countries. Then we can be talking about data analytics, where we can bring high new technologies and research staff. Now, most of them are multidisciplinary. Research staff can be even looking at policies, looking at various other aspects which will be important for us to kind of contribute to this domain. I mean, I just wanted to run through this, at what level we are talking about technicians and all that, but young students can participate, or young India can participate at all levels in this. I mean, his skill-based learning, I mean, there's a huge opportunity. We are seeing many foreign players trying to come in, but unless our youth participate and look at this and develop the desired skills, they will not be able to participate in this. And probably we will get into a situation where we have these opportunities and these opportunities will go away. Real world problem solving. Many of I've been associated with the academy also last 20 years. I've seen many of our students do projects which have not very high real world problem solving relevance. So, I mean, we are working, many of us are working on databases from abroad. I mean, is it that we don't have enough problems at home that we want to look at some other countries? So there's a lot of opportunities here itself, and it has to be a multidisciplinary approach. It cannot be, many times we see our students working in only in their discipline, only focusing on there. There has to be a little broadened horizon. They should, and it has to be coherent with the geostrategic reality. I mean, we have to be looking at sunrise sectors. Many of us are trying to look at jobs which are there, and we know that it has become very dynamic. The jobs that are there today will not be probably available after 5 years. I mean, that's the rate at which things are changing. So we should be looking at going ahead and contributing. Academic programs, as Sir has mentioned, policy and strategy, technology and innovation, business plan. I'm just trying to look at the multidisciplinary perspective, and structured HRD coherent to the national plan. Now, as Sir mentioned, Sagar Vision is there. There are multiple Sagar Mala project, inland water transport. Huge projects are associated with them, but I see that there is a huge skill gap. So capacity building is something which is very important, and our academias have to keep pace with them. I think much more coordination is required, and I think we are happy to play a very, very critical role in this, and we would be very keen to work together. And also, why are we looking at opportunities for outside people? Sustainable entrepreneurship is another big area where we can do good to the environment also and do good to ourselves. Focus on domain awareness. I mean, very specific, highly skilled people are required, and we should focus. Multi-stakeholder relevance. Many times we are chasing very few stakeholders, but you will see that UDA is relevant to many stakeholders, and so we need to look at who else can also benefit from what I'm doing. And so, and I think very important is focus on core competence, because that is something I think our industries also, I would request, we need to focus on that. This is the UDA framework that we talk about. I mean, if you look at the 4 stakeholders, national security is, talk about underwater domain awareness, there are 4 main stakeholders: national security, blue economy, environment and disaster management, and science and technology. So we need to look at this in a very, very comprehensive way. All of them may have their specific requirement, but the core will remain the acoustic capacity building. As I mentioned, the Indian Ocean region has a very unique requirement. We have seen in the Navy also, the import technology has not helped. We need to focus on indigenous technology development, and unless we do that, we will not be able to achieve what our ambition is. And the second is I just discussed the horizontal construct. If you look at the vertical construct of this, there is many of our regulations are normally top down. We look at a Western country or Western establishment and draw the regulations there. They do not fit into our requirements, and it becomes a very ad hoc approach. But what we require is a bottom-up approach where we do a lot of sensing. Sensing can be in various fields. So data collection is required, a lot of analysis is required, and then application-specific analysis, interpretation, and then we look at regulation. So, and if you look at from the Young India perspective, I'm just trying to divide this into various disciplines. Some technology people can come into the sensing part and analysis part, and then law students and various other domains can come into the regulatory. There'll be a lot of taxation issues. There'll be a lot of incentive-based regulations that have to be, the various models will be required. So even commerce students and various other disciplines also contribute. They have to be innovative, and we are ready to work with them and draw out. And as I said, the government is now very serious. A lot of senior people are showing interest in this UDA framework, and we are happy to offer many opportunities for Young India who can come out with some very unique kind of projects, and they can contribute. And we are so happy we have some very senior people who can really connect us to the right people. If we, some of our young students can show some promise in what they are doing. Thank you so much. I think much of the time, but I hope I've been able to give a broad sense of what UDA is and what the opportunities that are waiting for all of us. Our next speaker is Vice Admiral DSP Verma, sir. He has had a very distinguished career of over 3.5 decades in the Indian Navy, where he rose right up to the technical position. He then took over as the Director General of the ATVP project. It was under his leadership that India's first nuclear submarine was launched in 2009. He has been instrumental in encouraging huge number of SMEs and MSMEs to participate in the high technology indigenous nuclear submarine building project. Verma, sir.
Good afternoon, all participants, Dr. Majumdar, Dr. Das, and delegates is a seminar. And now I'm going to talk to you about, I've been asked to talk to you rather, about shipbuilding in India, I presume. That's what's in India, and especially commercial, and where we stand and what we need to do. And what I'm going to say probably will not be music to ears, but unless we look at what we are and where we are, we will not be able to progress, and we'll continue to do the same things that we've done over the years. Now, globally, nations with high economic and political dominance have all been associated with a vibrant shipbuilding industry. There is no doubt, as Dr. Majumdar said, that we were once a maritime nation. But if you remember, at that time, we were making all our boats. This is because shipbuilding engages a plethora of manufacturing industries, financial services, energy sector, and most of all, is the biggest job creator, all of which are fundamental for inclusive growth of the national economy, significantly impacting the GDP growth. The merchant fleet and the Navy are principal stakeholders in the maritime matrix, with 90% of our trade being carried by sea, specifically crude and petroleum. It is important that this strategic resource is carried in indigenous built vessels and operated under our own flag. This will minimize our strategic vulnerability. This is only possible by maintaining a shipbuilding base and shipbuilding base, and that can be maintained and augmented from within the country. Let us look globally what's happening in shipbuilding. Then we'll come to our own country. The developed nations have leveraged on their maritime capabilities, including shipbuilding. We all know that while the Japanese and South Korean shipbuilding industries received substantial government support in the 70s and 80s, we see where they are today, that helped them as a top players in the world. The Chinese shipbuilding industry flourished through the 90s, capitalizing on low labor costs, availability of cheap steel, and most importantly, favorable government incentives in terms of regulatory support for import of raw materials and technology. Majority of global shipbuilding share is held by 3 countries. South Korea holds the pole position with 41% of the ships built in the world, followed by China, which is about 25%, and Japan 16%. China and Japan keep exchanging places. This is as per the 2000 order book. What is our share? India today, with barely 0.2%, has a long way to go and needs to take significant lessons from these nations. We need to learn from what we see. Of the 30 billion Indian export-import trade market, only 88% is carried by Indian flagged or controlled ships. Indian seaborne trade has been growing rapidly, but the Indian shipping and shipbuilding sector has been lagging, despite development potential. India, with an ownership only of about 1,011 ships, vis-a-vis, say, the Chinese were about 4,000 and the Greeks of all the people, 5,000. Indian registered ships carry just about 0.9% of the global shipping stock, while ships built in India carry even less. An analysis of the major shipping companies in India reveals that majority of the ships owned and operated by Indian companies and under Indian flag are built in foreign yards. For example, Shipping Corporation of India, with a fleet strength of 63, has only 10 built in India. The next big one, Great Eastern, the fleet of 44, has none built in India. Why is this? Because the challenge in shipbuilding originate from what? From the onerous tax regime and regulatory framework. You'll be surprised to know that with the tax regime that existed, Indian ship owners preferred to order vessels outside the country because it was duty-free. But if they bought items which would go into their ships in India, they had to pay a custom duty. For a country that is predominantly peninsula with an extensive coastline and around 1,200 islands, our shipbuilding capabilities have definitely not kept pace with its economic development, market demand, and most important, human resource potential. Everybody knows that the shipbuilding industry is a cyclic industry. We were not that bad. The period from 2003 onwards witnessed an unprecedented growth in the Indian shipbuilding industry. Riding on a stimulus of global demand and favorable government policies, and what was the favorable? A subsidy of the order of 30%. The Indian significant, and with significant investments in the infrastructure during the period, the market share grew from 0.2% to 1.3%, and this was projected to be growing to about 7% in 2017. However, all of us know, by the time the wheels of this plane were about to set in motion, the global recession in 2008, coupled with the relatively less competitive presence of the Indian industry, led to the large-scale cancellation of export orders, and most of the companies suffered. The withdrawal, and to time it all, as is, we are all very good at timing, the withdrawal of the government subsidy in 2007, which I talked about, also compounded to the adverse effect in the industry. This left the industry badly crippled by the burden of over-leveraged capital and poor cash flow, and the market share dropped to 0.01% by 2013. You can go up fast, but you can come down faster. The irony of it all is the subsidy scheme has been revived in 2019, 12 years after it was suspended. And the subsidy on orders prior to 2007 is planned to be paid now to the companies in 2001 and 2002 by the government. What do we see? Yards such as the ABG and Bharati that were actually market leaders in export from our country on certain types of ships. Today, they are under corporate insolvency resolution process. Therefore, it is important that whatever we do, it should be consistent and it should be on time. Notwithstanding the discouraging state, I thought I must mention that there's a lot of optimism. The shipbuilding industry, especially the huge infrastructure that already has been created, is an asset. We can't let this asset just go. It needs to be nurtured and gainfully employed. Now, the shipbuilding industry is a slightly different industry than others because the way ships are paid for, you get an order only when you deliver, you get paid, unlike in most of the other things. So the major drivers will be a supportive government policy. I mean, we have to understand this is an asset for the country. It is a strategic asset, favorable taxation and financing, and it should be consistent. It cannot be for certain periods of time. Access to subsidies, domestic production of raw material like steel and marine auxiliary equipment. Today it is possible. Available of modern indigenous ship design. Now this is a very important issue. We should have our own ship designs. Skilled shipbuilding personnel like shipyard managers, design engineers, and technicians. Ship design, as I was just mentioning, is the foundation on which a ship is built and the single most important factor that determines quality, timely delivery, and profitability. The industry has to invest in training shipbuilding personnel. There has to be a strong academy industry interaction, and this is a must to produce effective curricula for ship design, shipbuilding, shipyard management, and project management. Ironically, there is not a single commercial shipbuilding design institute in the country today. There used to be one in there, but they're doing something else. I have not seen an indigenous ship design for our merchant ships being made in this country. Oh, that's one part of the story. But as I mentioned to you, the maritime domain consists of two matrix, and one should help each other. On the contrary, naval shipbuilding activity has been consistently on the rise, though mainly limited to DPSUs and PSUs. The Indian Naval Ship Design Organization, which was set up in the 60s, has developed 19 designs ranging from fast patrol boats at one time to aircraft carriers, through your frigates, destroyers, corvettes, tankers, training ships, and all along they have built with the Indian shipyards and OEMs from India to a large extent, and have built more than 90 ships indigenously. Of course, there are certain equipment that are imported. In the process, what's happened? The shipyards have been augmented with infrastructure. Soft skills have come into the yard, and they have got integrated with their production processes. Lots of capabilities developing in the design of auxiliary systems. In fact, almost all auxiliary systems are made in India today. They have been designed here for equipment and design of large number of automation systems by the Indian industry. Like you have the integrated platform management system, the bridge management, the automatic power management system, advanced composite commission suites. All of this have led to consequent enrichment and maturity of the Indian shipbuilding ecosystem. So we have an ecosystem that could be easily leveraged for commercial shipbuilding industry. How should we go about it? We'll discuss as we go on. There's another area which I would like to touch on, which is submarine design and development. Now, the Navy, this is another strategic area. Like commercial shipbuilding, we have, of course, a Navy which is important, but the submarine design and development is another strategic area where the country has rightly invested. There's a lot of investment that's gone in. Submarines are complex platforms, and they encompass almost all technologies in one hull. And in a nuclear submarine, some more. While conventional submarines have been under construction in India on a TOT basis, that of a strategic submarine design and development was undertaken as a national program. Due to its very nature, it's strategic. You can't get these things, and if you get, the tap will close somewhere. The Navy, the DRDO, and the VRC, they are joint stakeholders under a single program development agency, monitored frequently by the highest levels of the government. The program involved setting up of capabilities. Now, what was important here is it was not to build a submarine. It was to set up the capabilities in submarine design and construction, design development of the nuclear plant and fuel in-house, design and develop the strategic weapon which is required, infrastructure for trials and testing, design and development of special materials and equipment which will be required, including the capability to manufacture within the country. So the whole thing was to get the capability in place, because then we know we are in it for a long haul. 11 DRDO laboratories, 4 IITs, all the 4 IITs except Kharagpur for a short while, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and several engineering colleges, all were involved, each doing a small part of the requirement for the design, or for that matter, for development. the collaboration with submarine design institutes, submarine technology development institutes, material design institutes from outside, because we just didn't know. We never built a submarine before. We never designed a submarine before. Shipyard infrastructure, what should be there in a submarine building shipyard? Submarine equipment design, the missile, the control system, atomic research and nuclear fuel research institutes. All of these collaborated with their Indian counterparts and built the know-how and know-why and established a strong naval knowledge base, and which resulted in a credible manufacturing base in the country. This is not just done by just the public sector or one part of the organization. Every part of industry in the country was put together, went around to find out who had the strength and in which area. Several major private and public sector industries and scores of MSMEs and SMEs participated as partners in this national program. The several facilities have been set up in their premises at the cost of the government, and it is to their credit that they stuck by it. And today we have a platform at sea and set few more under various trials and construction. What is important to which I would like to highlight is, in the first boat, since we also needed to prove our design, we had to get some equipment from abroad, from friendly countries. And our boat was only around, you can say, 30% indigenous. The very second boat, which will be at sea very soon, is 80 to 85% indigenous. And the few equipment that are of complex thing are under development in the DRDO. Now, this ecosystem, whether it's valves, pipe, steel, the special steels that have been manufactured in this country, alloys, can be leveraged for design and development and construction of other underwater systems that we require, and also the surface platforms. We all know that the Navy continues expansion. There's already for the requirement to meet their targets. The impending shipbuilding loads are set to reach very high levels. Public sector shipyards, while having the capability to build complex naval platforms, are overflowing with orders and will not have the capacity. We see that every day. We cannot be dependent on one line of construction. If we have to move and move fast, a significant portion will have to be shared by the private shipbuilding industry. And this will be very useful for the private sector, because in times of, where there's a fall in ship orders from the civilian thing, you always have naval shipbuilding activity going on in one part of ER. Therefore, a strong and private shipbuilding industry is the need of the hour. It is not an option. What is the Indian scenario? We have to understand where we stand. There are about 20 shipbuilding repair yards, out of which 8 are in the public sector, 4 DPSUs, 2 are PSUs, and 2 are state units. Now let us compare this with, we always say China and we'll take on China, etc. Compare with China. They have 482 yards. How many employees they have? They have 2.9 million employees in their 482 yards, and we have just 60,000 employees, and we are in the yards that we have. 8 out of the yards account for more than 95% of the Indian order book, and most of them are defense contracts. Therefore, they're mostly the PSUs and the DPSUs. Most of the private yards used to build small ships, and in fact, to their credit, they also specialized on the OSV sector. And as I mentioned to you, ABG and Bharati were we even supplied both the domestic and global. 5 yards have the infrastructure for Panamax vessel, and 2 can build tankers. Now, having seen how we have treated the Indian industry, the shipbuilding industry, I had an opportunity to talk in the PIC in 2016. So I got in touch with a a lot of people in the shipping industry, plus the government. A lot of talk was done. But what I feel that this will not work. Growth in shipbuilding industry requires a national mindset and disruptive changes at the macro level. Then you can start off thinking, how we're going to build. The tried and we have models. The methodology of the Navy, which sustaining the warship building program, has been sustaining over the years. This could be seen. Our submarine model, which is having a national as a national program, that could be another. Third way could be if you look at the successful countries. I've just taken an example of the Korean model to see how their government went about creating this great asset. The Korean government, in addition to robust policy framework, focused in building institutions. That's exactly what we did in the submarine program, and support a mechanism for facilitating the growth of the shipbuilding industry. So you have to create the institutions first. Developed shipbuilding clusters. They developed to encourage effective cooperation between the shipbuilders and the ancillary industry, and they were all located close by. Funded research in cooperation with the Shipbuilders Association and provided credit facilities to the owners and loans to the shipyard. So it was not just the government, the Shipbuilders Association and other organizations also pitched in whichever way they could do, though largely supported by the government. They played a role in developing human resource policies. As I mentioned to you, you can have a yard, you can have people, but if you don't know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, things are going to take time, it will be non-competitive. They are both for shipbuilding and the ancillary industry. Took active measures to stimulate FDI. The first three I can say that was done in our submarine program. Now, they took active measures to stimulate FDI, just not saying that FDI is open up to so-and-so percentage. By establishing, they did 8 different foreign exclusive industrial complexes inside the national complexes and provided them low-cost rent plant site at discounted rates with government subsidies. In fact, up to 50 years of rent-free lease based on the level of investment, of course. Then foreign investment in shipbuilding and shipping machinery sector helped in receiving world-class technology. They promoted university, that is when I say they are the government promoted university, industry, R&D. As individuals, as MRC, as small groups, we can talk to small, but it should be a national effort. This can only happen when nationally we are involved in it. And what have they done? They have a Ministry of Knowledge Economy. And what did they do? They initiated the shipbuilding, the convergence of the shipbuilding and IT sectors to support their smart ship agenda. Therefore, in conclusion, measures of ensuring the growth of shipbuilding would therefore require a focused approach encompassing financial policy measures applicable to the shipbuilding industry as a whole. These will also need to be analyzed and suitably implemented continuously at the highest levels of the government by involving all stakeholders. Finance is a very important stakeholder, and shipping industry, of course, ship owners, the Navy and the Coast Guard, because don't forget that we will come to a grinding halt if we only keep depending on our public sector units. And they just cannot keep on increasing them either. The identification of the shipping industry as a strategic infrastructure industry is a prime need of the hour. Because once you consider this, the funds flow, the business is understood, and nobody is working for today in a strategic infrastructure industry working for a goal. A robust legislative framework supported by dedicated institutional framework would form the backbone of growth envisaged and propel the reforms desperately required. We need, in order to generate a critical mass for shipbuilding and ancillary industry, apart from the defense orders, a calibrated Most inland water transports can be easily constructed and built in the yards that we already have. In a phased manner, it's important that we have some standardized designs, not each shipyard doing each one. Then again, we have a problem. We have a standardized design. That's why you require a ship design organization. And the government can hold the authority of the ownership of the design, pass it on to these yards to manufacture. In a phased manner, all stakeholders should progressively ensure to migrate finally to Make in India. Because today, it may not be possible. We can build a ship, we can build a thing, we still require for some, like your main engines or something still coming from abroad. But we have to graduate. That can only happen if you have numbers. And therefore, as I said, that we'll have to graduate to Make in India. For a long-term viability, my take is the merchant marine built in the country and sustained and maintained from within the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I would like to now invite Captain Sudhir Subedar, sir. He has a long experience in the merchant marine, both offshore and onshore. He has been part of the maritime policy formulation at the highest levels. More recently, he has been instrumental in formulating regulations for inland water transport, a mega project of the Government of India. He's going to be priming us on the opportunities in the inland water transport sector. Captain Subedar, sir. Sir, 12 minutes for you, sir, please.
Commodore Veer, Dr. Das, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings of the World Maritime Day to all of you. In the context of World Maritime Day theme of sustainable shipping for a sustainable planet, very apt for the hard times that we are going through. We heard a little while ago Admiral Verma articulating the difficulties, opportunities lost, and need for building capacity of Indian shipbuilding, at least for domestic shipping and carrying most of Indian cargo on Indian bottoms. Continuing the theme, over the next few slides, I'm going to present opportunities in inland water transport and the difficulties that are on the way. This is a typical scene on a vibrant waterway which has not yet reached shores of India, particularly because road and rail seem to have hogged the limelight post-independence and in the colonial era. Latter because it was necessary to govern the large country, and Indian shipping had to fail for British shipping to survive, in spite of India's grand maritime heritage of 5,000 years plus. I believe the background lies in antiquated old laws and practices, and little has been done to reform the waterside sector. Is it developing waterways is cheaper, more efficient, but it takes time. Rhine River took 100 years to develop, and today it is 800 kilometers of thriving waterway from North Sea to all the way to Switzerland landlocked. Even Frankfurt International Airport gets its air turbine fuel from the barges and pipelines, not roadside tankers. An example of innovation for LNG carriers to come on the waterways. An artist's impression of a possible truck kind of vehicle that could be traversing backwaters of Bombay. A make in India, made in India cutter suction dredger that needs to maintain channels in the alluvial rivers of India. I would say Steve Jobs was much right in keeping things simple. Most of it is simple and can be made simple. Inland water transport, or water transport by definition, because there is no friction in fluids, should be 30% cheaper. But because of waterfront change of interface, inevitable handling, double handling, which is mostly called first and last mile connectivity. KPMG report, which I commissioned in 2015, brought out the reality that there is actually upward difference between road, rail, and water transport. And therefore, proposal was sent to the government for subsidy, which other than Kerala has not yet attempted, per ton per kilometer rupees being given to augment the difference and the lack of support over the last few decades. Opportunities in inland water transport, like I mentioned earlier, congestion is decongesting road and rail network is need of the hour. Improving carbon footprint of the transport sector, reducing social costs of accidents, etc. on the road, rail, encouraging modal shift of cargo, to reduce higher logistic costs of India, which presently stand double that of Germany. Is a case in point. It is a catch-22 situation. To attract investment, we need to have cargo traffic. To have cargo traffic, we need appropriate vessels, appropriate infrastructure, appropriate connectivity, appropriate river information service. Effective dredging for least available depth for economic quantity transportation, which studies tell us is about 2,000 tons at about 2.5 meters draft. Just between Brahmaputra and Ganges, NW1 and NW2, this small pictorial shows tremendous opportunities for connecting India's EXIM trade and regional trade to northeast of India, which needs rapid development to Nepal, to Bhutan, and also to Myanmar. The demand is there, the cargo is there. By the very fact that road and rail is contributing to most of it, even where the water resources are present. All the three modes of transport should ideally be part of holistic transportation policy, giving equal opportunity and percentage to each mode of transport. Depending on air transport only for perishables and high cost value items, or plugging in multimodal transport for end-to-end solution. Immediate solutions, I believe, lie in comprehensive revision of maritime acts such as the Major Port Act, Inland Ports Act, Merchant Shipping Act, Inland Vessel Act, Multimodal Transport Goods Act, Aids to Navigation Act, so that they are all in sync with each other. Vessels should mean the same in all the four acts. Seafarer should mean the same in all the four acts. Port limits should mean the same in all the four acts. I'm sure that on the land side, rules and regulations have same meaning for similar terms or same terms. Another solution is review together with Indian Maritime Meteorological Department the weather window. The concept of fair and foul weather in tropical situation should not be so diametrically different from temperate and high latitudes where weather is mostly bad compared to India, which is only bad during periodical seasonal monsoon seasons. Wave is a function of wind blowing over a fetch of water. And vessels are built and created and structured to deal with that. It is not possible to have a business plan with a weather window of half a year for normal operations. One is sure, owner, operator, manager, and the master would be guided by improved weather reports to take appropriate decisions of operational requirements. Presently, out of all the national waterways mentioned in the National Waterways Act, only about 16, and out of 16, 5 have some operational status. Much because the infrastructure is not yet ready, particularly with respect to port-led development or shipping. Terminals have come up, civil construction has happened, but there are no appropriate ships for that purpose. There are no appropriate financial structures in place. Giving shipping systems infrastructure status for deriving benefit of long-term financing has still not happened. One gets to see in the draft Maritime Vision 2030 document some of the things which I've been mentioning for some time now, both the weather window and infrastructure status, for example. Where is the shoe pinching? The shoe is pinching for a good PPP model. Government cannot be doing everything. We know that. We respect that. All one is looking for is enabling provisions for a good PPP model to succeed. Just a slide on a beautiful waterways of Europe. It'd be so nice to see neglected riverside communities develop into thriving communities. For communities on the riverside, there should be nice connectivity, which is provided by national highways, suitable for appropriate vessels such as Ro-Ro packs, which require very little terminal side or riverside facility. Connectivity is the key. I can recall big Ro-Ro packs and big passenger liners going into small waterways of pristine Alaska, Norwegian fjords, with very little to talk about terminal, but very nicely connected to the hinterland for tourism as well as for transportation. The Maritime Vision 2030 document in a draft form, probably for discussion now, proposes a Maritime Development Fund, but is still short on its commitment. So many kinds of funds have been announced by the government for all kinds of things. We only had sometime ship development fund sometime which went bust for all the wrong reasons. Incentive schemes also are around for various sectors, but when it comes to shipping, it is a bad word. The civil initiatives of MNREGA, JNREUM are not even considered in this sector. Why should one be making Grameen roads again and again, footpaths again and again, potholes repairs again and again, wells and ponds being dug for nothing again and again under the MNREGA spend of thousands crores and God knows how much, but nothing in the way of dredging, river training, and embankment, which would avoid erosion and maintain the channel for navigable use. Water for navigation, until the last water summit at Vigyan Bhavan, was not even on the government radar. Thankfully, it has come on the radar now that water is also useful for navigation. Otherwise, the low-hanging bridges over big rivers would not have happened. I think there is a change of heart, and the new bridges will allow domestic shipping to pass under. Another low-hanging fruit is the customs duty, the GST. Something needs to be given to kickstart the sector and help lock into green funds, improve carbon footprint, reduce congestion, reduce social costs of accidents, and make inland waterways help India grow into 5 trillion economy. Simple things to achieve. Not compare international shipping to domestic shipping requirements. Domestic shipping is simply facilitation, suvidha. Concept of proximity of land and assistance rather than deep sea, where one ship and its master and its owner operator have to be self-sufficient for every eventuality. That is not so for domestic shipping and riverside transport. More roads does mean more traffic. But more ports does not necessarily transfer into ships. Sustainable shipping, in the words of IMO Secretary General, is lot more than ship operations alone. Governments are urged to look after their interests in the context of global obligations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I must acknowledge the role of our media partner, Lokmanya, for making this happen. Digital media partners are extremely important for any such webinars, and I would like to really thank Lokmanya for their contribution. Now, I'd like to invite Captain Kalra, sir, for giving us an industry perspective. He has had a close to 3 decades of distinguished naval with operational role and also technology development. He joined L&T post that and has continued his technology development efforts with indigenous component. He's aggressively progressing some very high-tech projects, more on the strategic security level. And I welcome you, sir. Kalra, sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Das. Thank you so much. And in fact, it's always a pleasure to be with MRC. You have been very consistently taking strides in making this a success. Commodore Ranjan Veer, Air Marshal Bhushan, Dr. Majumdar. There are a lot of visions and a lot of people in this conference who have lots of experience. Told me, why don't you talk the industry perspective with regard to the maritime domain? So I would restrict myself to the industry perspective. But to paint a little bigger picture, anything that needs to get success it starts from fundamental technology, science, fundamental research, development of technology, and then its application by the end user in with whatever is your vision. So for basic science, you develop the technologies, and then you have a vision to make use of these technologies, and then comes in this industry in between. So industry is basically applying the technology. It does the applied research of implementing the technology in line with the vision. So that's where the industry comes. But there is one very unique thing about the industry. That unique thing is that the industry would go where the money goes, where it goes, where the projections go. So if you continue to work hard but you don't make money, or you start losing stakeholders' money, the industry is going to die. So we need consistent policies in line with vision. So in democracies, the things work the different way. In capitalist countries, the things work the different way. And in socialist countries, the things work the different in social. Now, let's come to the maritime domain. And if you see what all is there in this domain for the ships and submarines, and very, very high technology programs. And talking about the strategic board, what is it not that board? Starting from propulsion to float, move to metallurgy to project management to 3D modeling to artificial intelligence to command control and weapon delivery system and stuff. What is it that's not there? So when you have a vision, if you take an example of these strategic boards, strategic itself, to take a vision and create a success out of the whole stuff, almost the whole country moved and created a kind of capability. We have that capability. Do we have orders? Follow on orders? Do we have a policy to make this industry retain its trained manpower and continue on this as a policy? Do we need quotation or 7 quotation systems for doing such kind of strategic programs? Do we need 5 manufacturers to make the fighter planes, or do we need 1, or do we need 2? So these are the policy issues. How do we envision and how do we put the things on track? How do we provide the money? Then comes the kind of infrastructure which is created in the country. Now, as industry, the private shipyards, they are numbers of closures, no orders. There are shipyards who got the orders, delivered the boats ahead of time. Government doesn't have money to buy them back, to take them on time or ahead of time. So these are some issues which need sort of a synchronization across the value chain when we envision that this is what we want to really achieve. So if you link with the kind of expertise that we need, suppose we have this. We certainly have a good intent. Suppose we create this synchronization between the value chain and say, okay, if this was our dream and this is how the whole project and programs would go, where would the manpower come from? So these are the kind of encouraging things. So many young people in the country which are larger than the population of UK. Should our education policies be governed? How should we train them? So if you look at just the underwater domain, there are technologies which would start. You start looking at the ships or maybe the warship. It would start right from top. Electronic warfare systems. We should know what all is there in the spectrum, what's happening around. The radars, the surveillance systems, the communication systems. Then you will have combat management system, power generation systems, propulsion technologies, the nuclear propulsion technologies, the steam technologies, the diesel engine technologies. So while we are looking at the ship, there are so many technologies which are required to make a ship. It's even more complex when you look at submarine. So when we look at our curriculums in the colleges and we look at our manpower, these are the kinds of areas in which we can say, this is the kind of a syllabus that we would need in the colleges. This is the kind of an area in which we need deeper research. And the way the situations are around, we need to embark indigenous programs and make them successful. Make them successful by making sure that we have technologies of our own, the institutions who have facilities of their own, and we have consistent policies. What Admiral Verma was talking about, the strategic programs. In pursuing these programs, the visionaries actually sold the dreams to the end users and told the industry, this is our dream. Do you think we can do this kind of stuff in the country? And sure enough, we did it. And those advanced countries had done similar things in much different way. And when we did it in far, far better ways. So envisioning how the technologies should work, which way the industry should go, how should we train our manpower, what kind of infrastructure should be built, needs a perfect synchronism. We have great capability within the country for public-private partnership. There are strategic programs which we have done in which L&T has been part of it. We have state-of-the-art shipbuilding yard, which is owned by L&T. And we are working on so many underwater platforms which are unmanned platforms. So there are a number of technologies which go in unmanned platform. First of all, you have to have kind of a metallurgy which can sustain the abuse of a very, very abrasive environment. You should be able to float, you should be able to sink, you should be able to come up. You should be able to move. You should be able to navigate from place A to place B. You should be able to avoid the obstacles. Just imagine the kind of technology which is needed, the kind of software which is needed, the kind of intelligence which is needed to be put in this hardware. Young engineers can study this, can take research programs on this, and be part of these kind of developments. So I just wanted to these 2 or 3 messages message is a perfect synchronization starting from our vision to implementation and creation of facilities. Second message is industry is one big module which is a vehicle for success, but it would go where the money goes, where your intent goes. And then and when the industry gets involved, the manpower and resources need to be trained accordingly. So the underwater domain is one domain in which, as of today, we know on the ground and there's a lot of research. Okay, how about this? All of things that the service and management policies. So many technologies more complex in terms of actually and Dr. Again, and seminar here what
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your time. M.R. Gokhale sir has been instrumental in encouraging multiple concepts in his long public life, and he retired as the Vice Chief of the Air Force. And as he says, he's been more busy since then, as if being the Vice Chief was not enough. And sir has been instrumental in encouraging many people like us, and he has been involved in various initiatives. And he's also been part of the DRDO and supporting and guiding various strategic projects. And now he is, as the director of Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, he's been part of multiple national initiatives. And who better than sir to give the closing remarks? Bhushan Gokhale, sir, please.
Thank you, Arnav. I won't summarize what people have said, but I must also add my closing remarks and a thank you. When I requested Dr. Majumdar, the Maharshi, I would call him, of Pune, to give, we were talking about the water on the earth. I mentioned to him there is almost 70% of there is water and the rest is earth. He said, Bhushan, do you know that same thing is in the body? In the body also there is almost 70% of water and 30% in the flesh. And then on, of course, you heard him today, wonderful guiding thoughts that he gave, including how education, skills, all these things can now add on to the maritime domain. So thank you very much, sir, for your enlightening keynote address. And we, of course, have Commodore Rajan Veer. He is also the very renowned marine. Ever since last 3 decades plus, IMF, and then taking this initiative further, he's the Bhishma Pitama in a way of this maritime in Pune. Some of the issues which Commander Das mentioned, and I would like to just say that he's been at it for underwater domain. But I think he also talked about the sunrise sectors, taking on lead from Dr. Majumdar as to how skills can be created for these sunrise sectors. And there's a great opportunity for our youth. I think we are together in this particular journey, and we are taking, including this particular webinar, we'll make a service paper, and then we will thereafter take it to the highest possible government echelon to try and take this. Because there are wonderful speeches by almost all the talented people here. Admiral Burma spoke excellently about shipbuilding in India, the challenges, but he also gave a ray of optimism that there is, and I think there is a lot that we can go in making a national policy. I must add that there are something like 14 ministries in the government of India, if my numbers are not wrong, who look after the marine and the water resources. I think there is a requirement of synergy between all these ministries. I have been talking about the Aerospace Commission. I think similarly a Maritime Commission is required. Admiral Arun Prakash had spoken about it, or rather written about it almost about 10 years ago, because that envisages cooperation between whether it's a naval shipbuilding design or it's a merchant shipping. Also, there is issues of environment, the governance. There are so many issues of maritime. And as it was mentioned by Dr. Majumdar, that the Indian Ocean carries a name for our country. And there is a great amount of blue economy that we can look at. As Ambassador Mohan Kumar last time had mentioned, that the Vision Sagar, which is maybe we all look at it as a surface shipping, cannot take place unless and until we look at underwater domain, because everything is now, the threats coming in, whether it's the Chinese presence for submarines, whether it is exploitation of whatever resources that are underwater, whether it's mineral oil or even the fishing that goes on. So there is a tremendous amount of scope for that particular domain also. I think it was very well covered also by Captain Sudhir Subedar, who spoke about inland waterways. I like the way he was trying to mention that, some of the issues which can easily be done in India, we're still getting it from European Union. And two important points that one is about the dredging. I know it myself that we don't carry out dredging. Even in Pune, we all know that Khadakosla Dam, there is no dredging carried out. So what we hear many times, the water level is high during monsoon, praise that we have had. But unfortunately, a lot of it underneath silting is there. And we don't do this in reverse equally. And that's why during there are floods and the water just goes across because there is nothing done to channelize the rivers. So I think those are very important points. And he also mentioned about the colonial regulations that are there still that we need to improve upon. And of course, we had Captain Kalra. He, apart from having spent a long time in the Navy, today he is with the Larsen & Toubro, one of the major private players in shipbuilding and many other defense equipment. They were involved in the ATV project with Admiral Verma. And we all, I think I saw some of the people noting down, I did, that industry goes where money goes. It's a really important thing, because how long can they do charity work after all? So there is a requirement that there is a sustainable order. You can't have one odd ship and thereafter not follow it up, because they have set up so much of infrastructure. And how do you take that forward? And then this business about, all of us have always had this problem of L1 and, taking so many kind of, orders and not being able to execute them because we are stuck with the lowest bidder who may not give us the quality that is required. And then he also mentioned about, like Synergy I mentioned, he also talked about synchronization. And so today it's been a wonderful webinar, I must say, where we've had the academy, the industry, and of course the actual practitioners who have been able to come together. And as I said, we will take this forward. We have recorded this entire thing. We'll not only have a YouTube on that, but we will also take this as a paper to the highest possible authority. Luckily, we are getting support right from Delhi, and as such, very happy to take this forward. I thank all the participants who have come here and attended this. We know there are a lot of questions, but because of shortage of time, we will connect you with the speakers, and then we will be able to get you the answers. And with that, unless Commander Das has got any other something to say, I would like to close this particular webinar. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of a lot of very senior people among the audience. I'm sorry I cannot name all of them, but it's been extremely encouraging for us to see so many senior people in the audience. And I thank you all for joining us. And the esteemed speakers, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Thank you very much, sir.